So I was researching for this panel, and I came across this really interesting article that kind of spoke to me. And the author of that actually created this nice little graphic. And as I was reading through this, one of the points that he made during this article was that at times when we are really good at something, we have a tendency to discount its value. And that really stuck with me. It kind of spoke to me in that way. And so, and I'm kind of a geek, so I research a lot, like you guys know this. so I just kept reading and reading more about this, and it so reminded me that it's not just me. I have these moments, but it's not just me. Other people obviously feel this way as well. And so I want to get just a show of hands, because I got to prove this point, and please participate. Otherwise, I'm going to spend a lot of money on therapy after this. So, who in the audience, please raise your hands if you've ever allowed or had somebody else take credit for your work. Okay, interesting. Okay, so who in the audience here has turned down a chance to be on a panel because you didn't feel like you were an expert in the area or that you hadn't credentialized yourself enough? Okay. And then last, but obviously not least, so how many of you have responded to praise with the phrase, "It was nothing" or "It was no big deal"? Okay. All right. You're my people. I was like, you just saved me a lot of money on therapy, so thank you. Okay, so let's get started. All right. So let me get up on this tall chair here. So tell me, ladies, you heard my little intro about this article. You heard that statement. Like, you both have been out there front and center on more than one occasion. Do you agree with the author about what I've said, or what he said? Or can you give an example of a time that maybe you've discounted or self-discounted some of the work that you've done?
First of all, if I may, good morning. Mm-hmm. So amazing to be in a room where it's mostly us. Right. Awesome. So here's the ironic part. You might wonder why I'm even sitting in this chair. 2 weeks ago, Shailenberg, who is one of the directors at Google, came to me and said, my team is super excited that you are speaking at this panel, and they're really looking forward to attending the conference. There were a bunch of other directors around. And the first question came out, hey, what's going on? And Shay said, she's speaking at this really cool event, Women in Tech. And my response was, I'm on the board of SV Forum. They needed to fill a panel, and I was one of those people. Do you think I should be here?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? And Shay looks at me and says, stop talking yourself down. And for a moment, I didn't realize I was doing that. And that was the interesting thing, which was an interesting, ironic moment that I'm coming here to speak, and I was speaking myself down about coming here to speak. Eva?
Mm-hmm. Well, it doesn't do us any good to not be able to take a compliment. If somebody says you've done something good, just take it in. Say thanks. You're most kind. Turn it around. Let them hear what you feel about them. So I don't know if I want to add anything else to that. I think that I've been in technology for 20 years. And I have never had so much fun as I've had for the past 9 months when I'm starting to transition from going to all tech and IT conferences to going to these types of events. I am on a mission to exchange my LinkedIn network of 2,000 guys to 2,000 women.
Excellent. Thank you. And as you mentioned, your LinkedIn is mostly men, but that's because you've founded and successfully exited 2 technology companies, and now you have a third that you've started. So the third is not specifically a technology company, but you're serving the technology industry in a slightly different way. Can you tell us just a little bit about that and kind of how your experience, changed your focus in this?
So I love selling, right? I'll sell anything if you give me an opportunity, and I hate buying stuff. I'm a terrible spender, and I don't like shopping. But one of the things that, I was listening to the last panel, and this whole thing about values and culture and the way that I sell is I will not look at the person that I'm selling to. I will look at the whole, and I will look into their eyes until I see who's inside. Because then it doesn't matter if it's a man or if it's a woman, what they look like, how old they are. It doesn't matter. Look into their eyes and you can sell anything. But anyway, so I was selling file systems for the past 15 years, which is not like the most exciting thing, unless you make it exciting. Yay. So one of the most exciting things for me was actually to go out to customer sites. I would go into the data center. I would sit there with the man who was going to sign off on the order or tell the CIO to sign off on the order. And I would sit there and I would look into their eyes when they installed the software, and I would say, it's just 6 next buttons, and they would click, 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 and they would install it, and they would go, oh my God, it works. And I would say, yes, it does. And so that was great, and it was a really, really awesome journey. But if I may tell you a little bit about my background and how I actually ended up doing what I'm doing right now. So I'm in that space for 20 years, right? And I'm not going to go back to the whole history of it. But Sambolic was founded in 2000, and we sold it to Citrix exactly 2 years ago. I was with Citrix for a year, and it was a nightmare. All that visibility that we were talking about and people taking credit for your work, I had never experienced that before. And that happened day in and day out when I was at the acquiring company. It was really hard for me to go through that transition. But I learned a lot, obviously, because you self-reflect a lot and you think a lot. But as I came out of that a year ago, I thought, okay, what do I actually want to do now? What is it time for me to do? So I went back to Sweden, and I dug around in my basement, and I couldn't find what I was looking for. So I went home to my mom, and I said, Mom, have you seen my thesis, my master thesis? And she goes, yeah, it's right here in the kitchen. And she pulls it out of the bookcase. And she has the signed copy. And I wrote about mentorship programs in large Swedish organizations and whether they could help women to break through the glass ceiling 20 years ago. And then I realized, oh shit, I don't have any work experience. So I went to Silicon Valley, I worked in tech for 20 years, and then I woke up after 20 years and I realized, oh my God, nothing has happened. I mean, a few things are happening, don't get me wrong, but not very much has happened. So that is why I'm starting up EpiQuette, because I want to make sure that we retain women in tech, get more women into tech naturally, but then eventually also write a software platform for maintenance and continuity. So that's a little bit about the story on how I got here today to sit here in front of you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So Google Play, it's a huge platform, right? I mean, developers in, 200 countries, a few billion in installs and revenue and things like that. I'm sure it was super easy to build a global team, right? I mean, it's Google, come on. So no, I'm joking. But can you tell us a little bit about, I know you've been with Google Play since kind of the early days when it was a very small team, and now it's a global team that serves a large community. Can you tell us a little bit about just the process of the journey of growing that team and how you've been able to make that happen?
Yeah, of course. Maybe I should also take a little time to talk about joining Google. I was at Nokia. I was a VP, was running a big business, had a large global team. And sitting there, I was telling the board that the world is changing, that computing is going to take over what we once considered the phone. I was telling them that Android was going to take over the world. Then Google calls. Yeah.
Serendipity.
Google calls. And the person who's turned out to be a really good friend of mine, who, that's another thing, have really good people who can spot talent. So Susie calls, who's one of our leadership recruiting folks, and tells me that Jamie Rosenberg, who's my boss, really loved what I said. And this may not be an advice for people. I'm not on social media. I don't self-promote. I don't tweet, all of those things. I've done a little because of my job right now. But, so I'm like trying to be very calm. Thankfully, it's a phone call. I'm like, really? What did he like? And I'm Googling really fast to see what is it that I said. And she says, this is this director level position. It's about starting out this team to build all these things, etc. All my life, I've believed that I've done things that meet my purpose, what I want to do, that I'm not anchored on labels like titles, etc. Again, bad advice. So, and my first reaction was, oh, it's a direct level position, and I don't want to consider it. Now, here's the interesting conflict, right? Here's me standing in front of the Nokia board, telling them that Android's going to eat the world, and here's me getting the opportunity to actually do it and saying no because the label didn't match. So, being an engineer, I went to the CTO of Nokia and I said, he's a really good friend. And I said, I'm conflicted. What do I do? So he told me, why don't you go and talk to this partner at Egon Zehnder, one of the big leadership, recruiting agencies, and talk to them. And they told me initially, oh, you stayed at Nokia for too long. People are going to discount you in the valley. A lot of things, right? I didn't tell them. In the meantime, I had 3 people calling in from 3 different companies. We'll talk about Google because I'm there. So I said, okay, let me map out the world of mobile, and I would like to understand how you decide where investment is going. Now, here's the interesting thing. Everybody will tell you why you don't measure up. The question is, what do you anchor on? I knew the mobility space. So I had to anchor on that to not get sucked into the fact that I am not worthy. 5 minutes later, he was offering me a job at Egon Zehnder. This is not to say I'm smart. This is to say, as Eva pointed out, we could pretty much sell ourselves into any job. How do you distinguish between feeling not worthy and selling yourself into any job? And that anchoring is what matters. And so what he said to me at that time, I said, okay, ignore all of that. Just tell me, how do you decide when you look at 2 resumes, who makes the cut that you pay attention to? And he said 3 things: scope, impact, value. Titles mean different things in different companies, right? Scope, what is it that you're doing? What is your purview? Impact, what did you do with it? Value, we are all like public company stocks if you work for a public company. There's a price, and the value sort of says whether you're a marketing manager in one place or you're something else in another place, right? So I knew that all I needed to do, scope, Android was going to be big, I was getting in the ground. Impact, up to me, shame on me if I can't convert it. So all I knew is I had to negotiate for a package that was larger than what I was making at Nokia. The reason I give you this is that since then, I've hired a global organization. I have some super kick-ass women on my team, and I feel extremely proud about it. Yeah. I do. I feel extremely proud about it. However, even those women negotiated differently from the super kick-ass guys I have on my team. And I realized for the very first time, I negotiated for myself because I had a framework. Not because I was thinking about myself. There was math. I'm an engineer. I understand formulas. Mm-hmm. And I've spent more time thinking about that in building this international team, is to say, why do some people feel comfortable asking for things, and why do others not? So I didn't answer your question. I got on the ground, and purpose defines everything. We fundamentally said that we are going to organize this team around making developers successful, and we found others who believed in the same thing, and the rest is history.
Well, history in progress.
Yes, history
You're
in
not
progress.
Done yet. I'm sorry.
Yes, yes. That reminds me every day I've got lots of stuff to do when I go back. Yes, yes.
Excellent. Thank you. I mean, I think that's really important advice. I know, and I've recently had a conversation with with a friend about negotiating from a place of strength. It's not always easy. Again, sometimes we self-discount and do that aggressively at times. So, Nnena, thank you for joining us. You work with a lot of early stage startups, and you are a co-founder yourself of Black Founders. And I was reading I have to do a lot of research. That's just kind of my nature. And so as I was researching for this panel, I came across this really interesting study done by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And they were talking about mixed gender co-founding teams and how putting a formal agreement around operating structure and things like that together very early on in the process of forming your company helps equalize gender roles within that team. But when there is not that type of agreement in place, men are 85% more likely to be in charge. So, and it struck me like maybe this is a way of inadvertently giving up kind of the spotlight or that space early on. And so when you are working with founders, female founders, underrepresented founders, what are some of the ways that you advise them or things that you talk to them about, and so that they can really set themselves up for success and kind of claim that space from the very beginning?
So one of the reasons why you create a structure is that you need to go ahead and have people understand what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. And when you actually build in that structure, they're able to fill that space and to actually stand strongly in it. So for example, if you know that someone on your team is a little bit more of a visionary, you need to very clearly, distinctly set out that, okay, this person's a visionary, they're able to inspire people, we know that they can talk to investors, and by the way, it turns out to be the female founder on the team. If you don't go ahead and set that up at the very beginning, what will happen is that we will unfortunately default to cultural norms, where for better or for worse, depending on the culture that you grow up in, the man is the one who takes the lead, he's the one who's seen as forward-facing, even though he may or may not be the strongest person on the team for that role. But if you actually set up the structure, what's really interesting is that people fall in line as far as where their strength is. Maybe someone's a little bit more organizational. Maybe someone on your team is a bit more of a people person, and it's not the female founder, it's actually the male founder. Then he needs to be in that role instead of the female founder, and maybe she's more in the role of being the CEO. But you need to set those roles out at the very beginning because you need to be able to set expectations within your team. Startups by nature are chaos. They're growing quickly, there's a lot going on, they're having to navigate many, many things very quickly. What you don't want to add to the plate of things you're navigating is who's taking care of this role and who's taking care of that role. And when you start creating the structure, what it does, it also pulls the ego out of that. So someone who's maybe stronger in another area will not come and butt up against a person who maybe is a stronger person in marketing or maybe the stronger person in sales and et cetera. And so it allows you to keep your startup moving forward versus your startup melting down into chaos along with all the other stresses you have on the outside.
Thank you.
I can actually give you a live example of that because my co-founder is a man, and we ran the company together for 15 years. So we had very clear lines of who was doing what. And it wasn't like a written agreement from the very beginning, but we quickly figured it out. So he was responsible for product development, and marketing, and also dealt with the majority of the PR press because he was doing marketing. And I was responsible for sales, finance, and operations. And that meant that he held the CEO title. I was president and COO, which suited me really well. So I had on my card, I had the title president. So when I was out, I was the outward-facing person of the company. But then I also had 3 children during these 15 years, which meant that when I needed to have more passive periods and work a little bit less and be on the road less, I could actually go into an operating role, but still make sure that the company was running the way it needed to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's excellent. And I think that it's on an interesting point as well, which is life is not just linear. It's not just a flat surface. Sometimes there are peaks and valleys, and you need to take different roles at different times in your career. And I think that that's an excellent example of a way to balance that, still maintain your importance and kind of own that success, but at the same time have flexibility enough in your career that you can accommodate just life and the things that you need to work with. When we were in the green room, we actually had a really interesting conversation, and it kind of struck me this morning as I was driving in, which is it's very easy to claim kind of your space or to own your success or the things that you're working on when you're an individual contributor. But as you move up in the organization, you now have a number of individual contributors that work for you. And you see this in startups as well. How do you kind of get out of that individual role and into managing a team, managing multiple teams, things like that, a global responsibility? How do you kind of claim that success or that space, yet still be inclusive of the people that work for you so that they also have that sense of success in space? It's open to anyone.
Okay, so first you have to learn to let go of control, which is huge for most people. For me, it's awful. Like, it's really, really hard. But you hire, right? You hire people that are better than you are, and you nurture them and you enable them. Any good leader should be able to lift their team up and lift the individuals up. And by making those individuals shine, the light will shine on you. You don't need to talk about yourself, even it's nice, but talk about your team, talk about what the team has accomplished. And two of my best friends that are the most authentic, genuine people that I know are actually leaders very high up in their organizations. One is actually the CEO of a company in Sweden. And one is a man, one is a woman. And they never talk about themselves. They never talk about their own accomplishments. They always talk about what their team has done. And this, I've watched them throughout their careers for the past many years. And this has been, I've seen them climb and climb and climb, and they always talk about their team. So I think it works.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I have simple rules on my team. I have clear objectives. I have clear runway, because you can't just bookend people. Good ideas don't come. So you have to have a balance. So 60 to 70% of the time, there are clear objectives. 30% of the time, everybody knows Google's 20% rule, but this is very much on an individual basis, so that great ideas come up. And I have one rule: no surprises. I have no surprises with my boss, and I expect my team to have no surprises with me. So even if they are picking up a fight, they're tripping, they're falling, they'll first come and tell me, I tripped, here's why. I'm like, what could you have done differently? And if they say, here's the reason, then I step in front of them. That's the other thing. Step in front of your team. Don't throw them under the bus. Yes. Then there is no surprises. When you know, it's a two-way. When you say there's no surprises and you realize you step in front of them, then there's no surprises. So we have a very simple code. It's worked for me all my time. It's worked with my bosses. Sometimes I think it worries them. I'm like, I'm going to pick up a fight. They're like, oh, you see? But you let them know. But the nice thing about no surprises is that you also get guidance. People come, they give you guidance. It gives you perspective.
So I have two different thoughts on that. Thought number one is that you need to actually know who's on your team and what their strengths are for you to actually be able to work, to be able to utilize their strengths. It might be that someone on your team is a little bit stronger than you in, say, more of an organizational sense, but you won't know that until you take the time and you observe their work product and you talk with them and you get to know that. Then once you know that about their skill set, then you start to sort of hand certain items to them so that they manage that, and also then you're not the one dealing with that because that's actually not your strength. Also, the second thought I have is that I agree with you. My idea of a good leader is someone who trains someone so well that they actually surpass them. If the person I'm working with and the person I'm training does not end up becoming better than me, then I actually feel as if I've failed. And so for me, it's a little bit of saving face. Oh, this person's now actually succeeding. Okay, then I've done a good job. But then also just taking the time to let people know that you've noticed the work that they've done and that it's good. If I can touch a tiny bit on the imposter syndrome, one of the ways that we can sort of combat that in each other is when we see something that is good in someone else, to actually call that out. Oftentimes we believe it more when someone else tells us that we have this strength that we might sort of have a feeling we might have, but then when you have multiple people saying, no, actually you really are good in this particular area, we start to believe it, we start to become stronger in it, and then we are able to sort of take over that space a lot better than we would have before.
That's an excellent point. And and I think we had touched on that in the green room as well, about how do you amplify the strengths, the points that people make in a meeting, and you had brought up an excellent point about that.
Yeah, I don't know if folks had read this article in the New York Times about women in the Obama administration. They all amplified each other. I think we notice a lot of times, and it's very hard sometimes maybe for somebody to say, isn't that what I said? But I could say, isn't that what Eva said? And we have much more comfort in actually amplifying somebody else. And then that becomes culture and norm. And it also puts good practices. Here's the other thing. We had a recent situation on my team. Well-meaning people running against a crazy deadline sometimes has frayed nerves, right? So nothing in terms of like, oh, this was a crazy behavioral problem that needs to be addressed. That's a different thing, right? So here was the thing. Young person, right out of business school, super eager to do things. Slightly more senior manager, definitely a thoughtful human being. Young person, female, manager, male. Okay, so just so that you understand situation. She's eager, she's trying to say an idea. He's 3 steps ahead because he's already realized that this idea doesn't work. He cuts her once, he cuts her twice, he cuts her 3 times. Not his norm, but he's running against a deadline. Young person feels very upset, doesn't know how to process. 2 other people in the room don't know what to do because they're also young people, they don't know what to do. They come to me and they said, this was not according to the norms of our team, but we didn't know what to do because they didn't feel that they could call on that manager. So my guidance to them was to say, can I please listen to her? I think she had an idea. People are more comfortable doing that. Rather than telling manager you need to behave, you're much more easier to say, can I hear her idea, please? Okay, 5 minutes, can I just hear her idea? It's a nice way to tell you're cutting her, right? So sometimes if I could say one thing, find your blocking and tackling team. I've said this, Mike, wherever you are, his good friend, right out of business school, I was working in a startup. So here's the deal. We were working all hours, everything else, product gets ready. We believe that we're building a big telco product. So we believe that we need a senior person to sell to telcos. So in walks, we'll call him John, right? In walks John, very different from the composition of our organization. Older, comes from telco, believes in a certain hierarchy. Mike and I, similar levels in the organization. Mike manages product management. I was doing product marketing. We are having this conversation like Nnena and I, like this. John walks from there, crosses Mike, comes to me, hands over a paper and says, can you make 50 copies? Right? Now, here's me believing I'm a startup person. I do anything because we did. We fixed furniture from IKEA, etc. Right? Right? Here's me, sort of socially conditioned, not realizing it, with my Eastern background, about acknowledging hierarchy, not male, female, older person. You're respectful, that's where I come from. Here's me realizing for all my so-called notion I'm a feminist, I have no clue how to respond. Mike looks at him and says, oh, John, you haven't seen where our new printers are. Let me walk you to that. Right? Yeah. Have your blocking and tackling team. Have more mics in your world. Right? Fast forward. I'm at Nokia now. And we are on this boat. If you know Finns, they love sailing. And my boss had this amazing big boat. And in Finland, administrative assistants actually pick up after you. I don't know why. You should tell me. I know.
There's some Finnish men out here, I think.
Yeah. No, sometimes they do, right? No, I'm just kidding because you work in Europe and everything else. And a lot of times in tech, if you're out on a boat with a technical team, chances are it's you, female, and your admin, female. Right? And we are out in the ocean, in the sea, I suppose, and it's beautiful. We are thing, and my boss turns around to Mariut, who's like his admin, and says, why don't you get us some drinks? We're completely normal people. We can go get our own drinks, right? Now, I want to help Mariut. Then I think of Mike. I'm like, what would Mike do? So I turn to Tom, who's a very good friend of mine, completely awesome person. It's just that that's what I'm saying. Sometimes it's not because people are bad. People have just not been trained. So I turn to Tom and say, Tom, can you help Mariut? He's like, of course. Stopped me from having to go and bring drinks, kept with my value system, got Mariut help, and made a bunch of really good guys acknowledge that they should help. So sometimes the situation is not gender, not things, it's just experience. And so, yeah, I invoke Mike all the time, so here you go.
No, I think that's excellent. I think that's you brought up a number of good points in that story. One, there are things that we can do to help each other and support each other in this. The other thing is there are men out there that are out there to help us too, meaning, the Mikes of the world, other people like that you can turn to and not only get mentorship from, but also who are aware and self-aware enough to see the things that are going on and to help move it forward in a more productive and constructive way. So it's great to help support other women in the organization, but I think that sometimes we should acknowledge those men that are also aware and kind of helping move the culture forward in a way like that. And so I appreciate that story very much. So Denise, how are we doing on time? Are we good?
Yeah, we're good. We have time for a couple questions from the audience.
Okay, excellent. Why don't we take a couple questions from the audience then?
Okay, the first question from the audience is, I'm writing a book called The Bitch Stigma, and I'm wondering if you ever come up against judgment for being a strong, assertive, professional woman.
Okay.
All the time. So I was speaking at a lunch last week, and a similar question came up, and I said, "Oh, I love being a bitch." And they all went, "Oh, that's terrible." And I said, "You know what? It's just about being who you are, and it's not. Don't worry so much about what the other people think. You're not there just because you are there. You're actually there for a reason." So a quick example: we had been acquired. It had been announced. We were at a trade show. We were 2 days into the new company. And the CEO of the new company says to me, "Can you go and meet with this company? They're a partner of ours." And I was like, oh my God, he must be joking. This is the company that was the closest competitor to us. And I knew that they thought that they were going to be acquired, but we were acquired. So I walk into a room where there are 4 guys from the other company sitting like this. And I was like, okay, I already know what they think. They think I'm the B word. And it's now up to me to either prove that they're right or prove that they're wrong. And once again, I used that method of trying to get inside of them. So I put myself in their shoes. And I said, I totally realize that the tables could be turned. You could be sitting on this side of the table and I could be sitting there. But we were the ones that were acquired, and you're still a partner of this company. So let's figure out a way that we can work together.
Excellent. Yeah.
I would say yes, and then you add the other layer of that of race. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard this, but people consider Black women to be loud and strong and everything else attached to that, which I personally love. No, I think it's totally awesome. But it also comes with navigating a couple of issues with that. And so for me, what I've started doing over time is to think that, okay, number one, my only job is to do a good job. It is not my job to control someone else's perception of me. And also, by the way, I don't know if you guys have realized this in your life, you actually cannot control someone else's perception of you. They could be so ingrained in a certain way of believing about a certain type of person that no matter how you present yourself, you're not going to change that. And so knowing that fact, okay, so let that take weight off of you. Your only job is to do your job. So if it means that someone else perceives you as a bitch, that's not your problem. It just isn't. Because, again, you cannot control that. You have no power over controlling that. And it's not your job. So focus on what you need to do, because what I find in my life, that when I am more concerned about other people's perceptions of how I do my job, I actually do a worse job because I'm caught up on the wrong thing. I'm not focused on my actual target. So focus on your target, get it done, move on.
Excellent, yeah. We have another question?
Yes, so actually a couple other questions, but this one is directed towards Purnima. How do you tell the difference between startup tasks and inappropriate requests?
So that.
This is in reference to your story about the printer.
Oh,
Yeah.
excellent. Yes, very, very good question. I always looked at intent. I've always looked at intent. I think Nnena made a very good point in terms of not worrying about what somebody thinks. So you have to understand, in that particular scenario that I said, there was some of it was me, about how I should deal with John, whether he's senior. Shedding that has helped. Some of it is you. Some of it is being honest about intent. Because another way to say it is, how do you realize it is not somebody who has a crazy notion about you versus somebody who's actually giving you feedback? Right? And so I think being able to know how much of it is me, how much of it am I going to shed, and how do I actually look? So for example, Mike and I lifted boxes to trade shows. We didn't have a staff. It was us. We were the department. We were the product management department and the product marketing department, right? We put up booths. It's intent, right? So that's how I filter. And I ask somebody. I think women don't ask enough. Turn to somebody and says, am I the only one feeling this? And usually ask a guy. If there's one thing I will say, if you're walking into any situation, make it anticlimactic. And the only way to do it is to play it out, and play it out with somebody who's not going to be kind to you. Because you're not walking into a kind situation. So play it out with somebody who's going to be honest with you. For me, it's my husband. It's a surprise we're married as long as we are.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And the last question, this is for the entire panel. How do you handle when your executive takes credit for your idea?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
I'm maybe not the right one. I've always started my own thing. So,
Well, so like I said, during the time of Sambolic, nobody took credit for what I was doing. So that was a really nice position to be in. And then after we were acquired, I actually got my first boss, right? But I didn't really have a boss for a while. And then lots of turbulence, but they inserted somebody right on top of where I was. And it wasn't so much him, it was actually other people, like turning to him instead of turning to me. He had no experience on the product. He had no history with the company. He had no idea who our target customer was. He didn't know any of these things. And he told me flat out, I'm only here to get a promotion. And I could probably help you to get a promotion too, by the way. And I said, well, that's great. Thank you very much. So he lasted 3 months. And then after 3 months, he called me up. We had talked 4 times during those 3 months. And he called me up and he said, hey, I know you're doing 98% of the work. And I was thinking, oh, what 2% is he doing? But so I don't think that I'm going to last here. They'll probably move me away. And 3 days later, the manager's manager calls me, and they said, well, he's now out, so you're on your own again. And I said, okay, that's great. But so it wasn't so much him trying to take credit for what I was doing, but it was this whole thing of everybody looking to him. I was in meeting with partners that I'd been negotiating deals with for the past 5-6 years, and they all of a sudden started turning to him. And he was courteous enough. He said, why don't you ask Eva? She knows. But it's really difficult. And once again, it's that thing of asking the questions at the right time.
Yeah. I've been very fortunate to have really good bosses, besides figuring out what I want to do, a very big part of my decisions is who I work for. I rather do something that seems, I took a lateral, one of the first most important decisions I did when I just got off fresh off the boat with my engineering degree in the United States is to take a lateral move. Because I believed in the boss more than I believed in the other person who was giving me a promotion. Being a geek and being just, schooling is right, no? Every year you go forward and you get grades and you get strokes for getting forward. I struggled with it a lot, but at the end of it, I went with my gut about working for somebody I cared about. I consider him a mentor even today, 15 years later, right? And so that has shaped the choices I've made. Now, you find yourself in the situation, what would you do? There's few things to think about. Do you care about the work and is it getting you ahead? Then it is, as Nnena pointed out, what am I here for? Not for the credit, but for the skills. Where is it taking me? Because your careers are long and glorious. And they will be. No boss is going to stop you. So figure out what you want to take out of it. That's number one. Number two, again, find out who else can talk about it. I go back to coalitions. I go back to partnerships. You are not alone. Women, if there's one thing I have learned, I do a lot of listening lunches, working with, not just about women, many other minority groups within tech, within other things. The notion of being alone supersedes everything. You are not alone. So look aside, look around. You have a lot of people you can support, which means then they can support you. We all have a role here.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I think that's an excellent point to finish on. So thank you very much. So we're out of time. I could go on for ages on this. I think it's been an excellent panel. Thank you so much. I want to thank Denise and her team for the great work they've done to put this together. And I also want to thank Tim, who's on my team, for helping put the panel together. So I may be up on stage right now, but he did a lot of the hard work to get us all up here. So I want to also give him a shout out. I think he's watching on Facebook Live actually right now. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating and sharing your story as well at the beginning. And like I said, for saving me a lot of money on a lot of therapy. For now, I know I'm not alone. And thank you, for panelists, for sharing your journey and your wisdom. We appreciate it. And thank you for supporting us all here today. Thank you.